all of you. Happy to be here and happy to be moderating this session on a topic which I myself have read a bit about in the past few years and very curious to know where this takes our profession. We have very little time, so without much, you've got all the introductions. We'll hit the ground running. I want to request Apar Gupta to start this session with about a 3-minute opening comment on use of AI in law. How will it affect the profession of lawyering? Over to you, Apar.
So thanks so much. I think a bit of this question is a hypothetical. We are seeing into the future how it will impact practices, and practices are very different for lawyers based on how they practice and what is the nature of their practice as well. But just taking it very in terms of a very broad framing, the first is that in terms of how digitization is impacting the larger justice system, which is the courts, is that phase 3 of the e-courts project is ongoing. In fact, I'm on a subcommittee which is going to formulate how judicial data is used in terms of how it's made available to different stakeholders, and yet at the same point in time data protection is implemented. So you also see that there's at least one judgment to my notice from the Punjab Haryana High Court where ChatGPT has been used. ChatGPT uses large language models. It's one of the many technologies in artificial intelligence. And I think right now we are in the midst of a hype cycle, Gartner's hype cycle. So we are estimating the productivity gains as well as the disruption to the legal industry at this point in time at a much higher extent than what is actually happening. And most lawyers, I think so, will at best be using plugins to respond to emails, and most lawyer emails happen to be also very carefully drafted if they happen to be working in good firms, right? So they charge for their emails as well. But coming back to the point, I think over a longer period of time, it is a paradigm shift. It is a transformative technology. It will lead to certain kind of changes which will be driven by unit economics, either in firms, because AI does not ask for time off, AI does not ask for increments, AI does not change jobs by itself. So there will be certain changes. I also think the third aspect to that is that AI will be implemented in certain state processes in the justice system by itself, particularly towards policing or petty cases by itself. That will represent risks because AI consists of firstly training data and secondly then the larger algorithm which is then deploying it. Training data itself has huge amounts of bias, but a lot of people will say that if you outsource something to a machine, its decision is objective, it is not biased. But at the same point in time in criminal justice, housing, entitlements, a lot of the legal interactions which ordinary people have, which larger entities, artificial association of persons don't have, it will have an impact. So I would say it's a very broad topic and it'll have a tremendous amount of impact. And happy to have this conversation, take it forward.
So thank you, Apar, for the opening comment. I'll go to Manisha Singh. Manisha, what I read The Economist very recently about Michael Schwartz, a lawyer in New York, using ChatGPT to file his petition. It helped him draft his petition. This is how it helped lawyers be more productive. Do you see anything more than that happening in this space? Of course, we've read about AI courts, but I think that was too far-fetched when we read it. I don't think it's a reality even today. But could you, in your own experience, tell what is lying ahead for all of us in this field?
Thank you, everybody. This is very pertinent question, definitely in the current times. We see a very fine synergy about the overall development on the data. Data is the new oil, and definitely when there's a data, we have a technology to read it, and that leads us to the artificial intelligence. The US case which you are referring to is definitely, I would say it's a clerical error which happened. Even we do not file anything, even if it's drafted by the interns or the juniors, we read and go through it. But I must say that it reduces the time frame substantially of doing so. We have to keep using the AI. As far as the adjudication system is concerned, going forward, what's going to happen is that people will measure the time. Even now, like traffic policing, we can argue that. I know some of the people who have been challaned and they have gone to the court 2-3 times and then they have argued that they have not violated. Whereas what they can do, why to waste them? You measure the time taken to argue that and the time, money which you are paying for it. So those things are already automated, particularly in India. Now I'll take something extra from the questions which you have raised. Like, I specialize in intellectual property. I'm an IP attorney, and we have been dealing with this IP innovations by the AI instruments. So it is completely, till now it has not been recognized. Okay, you have an invention, AI is doing an invention, but we have to be mindful that how the AI is doing the invention. It is doing the invention based on our own prior inventions, which we call in our practice as an improvement of the existing patent. So it's based on analysis of that. So it cannot be, we also do the same thing. But when we come at the machines doing that, that means it's an analytics, it's an use of algorithm. So that's why we are not recognizing it, because then it will be very, very massive and there will be no boundaries for that. So we still, as the topic says, that the influence of AI on lawyering, we are still going to have place for doing a lot of things.
Okay, point well taken. I'll go to Anisha. Anisha, your opening comment.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to something that Manisha said, right? There is AI and then there is generative AI, right? The Schwartz case, what it taught us is that AI should be used as a tool, right? It should be used as a tool for us to optimize our resources, but at the same time, it cannot completely take away the human element of having to verify everything. And, you know, actually, I started LexStart with the idea of actually using AI in contract generation 8 years back. Back then, there was no chat GPT, so systems were not that sophisticated. But even there, what we did is, we could at least bring up the optimization in creating the base drafts. But at no point of time could we take away the requirement of an experienced lawyer having to look at the specific use case and then reviewing the contract. So that element will always require human intervention.
Okay, point well taken, that there'll be elements that will require human intervention. I want to share an anecdote. In India, any automation which came right from the time when banking was computerized, I remember there was protests by unions saying, you know, what will this lead to? Anything has a employability or a job angle to it. And when we speak of lawyers, I think the lawyers that work in district courts across the country also look at these things. It's not just lawyers who sit in halls like these. And that is why I remember a conversation with a judge that I hold in high regard 8 years ago about mediation. And you know, he simply told me, I was very excited to speak about mediation. Before the panel, we were having coffee. And I said, sir, that if you encourage mediation, the pendency will go down greatly. So he told me, young man, let me tell you, if I send cases for mediation, what will I do? So I was speechless that, so just before the panel discussion was to start, and the gentleman in question, the judge, was to speak on mediation, and I had an idea of how this is going to go. But any which ways, I'll go to Harsh, Buch,
Today we have a lot of mediations happening.
Yes, yes. Harsh, your opening comment on this issue.
Right, thank you. So a lot of these questions about AI is about how will it affect practice. Much to my agreement to the panel, I have a slightly different view where I say that lawyers today practice in two kinds of roles. One is the traditional role of being a lawyer practicing law. Another is that of a businessman of managing their own law firms. As an entrepreneur, independent lawyers, partners of law firms, you all will agree that a lot of administration work also does fall at our desks. Looking into the future where AI is able to assist partners of law firms into these activities is something that I am really looking forward to. Not just having petitions drafted, but for example, all over the country, pan-India, most courts are moving towards e-filing. if at some point of time there is an algorithm that recognizes what kind of petition in what format is supposed to be filed in which court, a lot of human time spent in pagination, in formatting can be, saved. And obviously, I don't need to tell all the lawyers here, money saved is, time saved is money earned. Bringing that aspect, a lot of lawyer fees are usually outstanding. We are, reaching out to clients through emails, through phone calls, through messages. If there is an assistance in that nature where, a lawyer just needs to mark the clients that need to be reminded, and there's an automated generated email considering what was the past invoice, what is the invoice outstanding, and when does it need to be paid, how long has it been remaining outstanding. This itself would help lawyering greatly. On the other hand, I am not really a proposer of AI-based law. I feel that in dispensing justice, apart from a very neutral judge, one of the most important things that a judge needs to understand is emotional intellect. And my example is the Article 300A of the Constitution of India. You come to a court and say that, look, I have been living on this plot of land for eons, my family, everyone has been living here, but unfortunately, apart from legitimate paper titles, I'm not able to establish. I'm able to establish the fact that I've been tilling this land. I'm able to establish from a lot of witnesses that I've been living here, my family's been living here. An AI-based justice dispensation system would have completely rejected this plea, because there is no concept of understanding that, yes, this man, this person has been living here, the family has been tilling that land. That would only come through a human, emotional, intellectual mind. So until and unless there is ChatGPT or any other kind of AI algorithm that can show me this emotional palatability, I am not going to be a real proposer of AI doing any kind of law.
Point well taken. I'll go to Apar. Apar, there are many India-specific decisions we take on many issues. Digital courts was one. Until COVID happened, there was very little adoption. Suddenly, you saw people who were very wary of using digital technologies adopted to it. It was, I think, a necessity at that point. As far as AI is concerned, this discussion in the past 5 years, greatly we saw in China, also in Europe and America greatly. India, this wasn't much. This was limited to lawyers in cities like Delhi and Bombay reading international magazines talking about it. What do you see is going to happen in the next 5 years, given that we have a Chief Justice of India who's greatly promoting the use of technology in courts, and when it comes from the top, changes do happen. In your view, what lies in the future for us?
I think, firstly, I think it'll be the firms, law firms which have already allocated budgets for knowledge management systems. So there'll be some person there and they'll say that, hey, let's look at these 3 tools, these 2 tools, they'll try that out. So I think that, and specifically younger litigation lawyers will try to optimize how they utilize it. I think that will be the primary impact, and the kind of things which they will do is also in terms of transcription services, things like that. Rather than much more application-based. Law students will plagiarize projects, that's to be expected. I think that will be the primary impact. And I also think that to a large extent, there'll be puffery. People will say that we are using AI when they're not using AI. That's also to be expected. We've already seen that in some state deployments like Arogya Setu, or even in the Delhi Northeast riot cases, Delhi police has claimed we used artificial intelligence in courts, etc. So all of that will happen. I think what is needed is, and I don't think so given its institutional culture it will happen, is that practice guidance needs to be provided by the Bar Council of India. through a working group or something on how lawyers can use AI and do it without breaching their ethics obligations towards their clients. And I think that is what is necessary, and that is where the conversation needs to go.
As far as the law firms and the legal practice is concerned, there is many law firms who are already using automation tools. Automation tools is that building their internal algorithms to check out from their own databases. Like I'm an IP practitioner, so we use, like the government is also using the portals for online filing. So there is substantial automation over there. Now coming to AI, AI definitely we are not using it. As Harsh said that there will be puffery lot. Many of the clients will ask, have you written this or is written by the AI? That's a very dangerous thing to commit. So definitely we do not, and I personally do not advocate to use it on a mass scale because it's still getting reformed, it's still getting upgraded. And but we cannot say that we are going to be very far away from it. It's a very, very important tool and we must use it to further improve it. So there's a long way ahead, but still it can be moved very fast.
Anisha here. Anisha, two things. Let's take a 30,000 feet view. The generation which was born in the 1980s, probably they all have turned partners in law firms now. They're closer to 40. Then a generation came which is the 90s and the early 2000s. There is now a generation that will enter lawyering that was born after the first iPhone was released in 2007. So we are talking by 2027, the boy which was born, which will take up law, will be the boy who had used iPhone since childhood. His adoption to technology will make us feel like dinosaurs. When these boys enter and come out of law schools, they will establish law firms. Obviously, they'll join law firms. Do you think the great leap in AI will come then in the next 5-7 years? That is because we are talking of a generation which will be much more clued in or grown up in a digital ecosystem than this generation, which has seen, I think all of us would have seen landlines in our time and grown to this age. These guys haven't seen all that. And secondly, the foreign law firms using AI, and now that foreign law firms will establish offices, at least a few, their operating mechanisms will have an impact on the local big law firms because, of course, best practices are adopted. Your views on both of these?
So the current generation has already started using ChatGPT to start drafting clauses, yes, right? Because they don't want to make an effort trying to draft better clauses. So you're already seeing it, right? Where at least the dinosaur generation that you just mentioned would go through umpteen number of drafts to find the right clause, try and fine-tune it better. Today, like you ask a first-year associate or even some of our trainees, like, hey, why don't you take a stab at it? ChatGPT to the rescue, right? And so it's already happening. But and that is where one has to kind of build more sophistication, because when you say AI and what Manisha said, right, within the four walls of a firm, right, automation and using AI, great, right? And that'll help in making the organization far more efficient. Another use case is due diligence, right? It'll make the organization more efficient. But the minute you take it outside those four walls, so when you start using ChatGPT, there are concerns around privacy, there are concerns around confidentiality, all of that, and there's also concerns on the authenticity, like we saw in the Shorts case. Like ChatGPT completely misled him, right? So I do agree that sophistication will come in, and yes, by the time the latest generation becomes partner, AI would be at a very, very, very different place, and I'm sure they will help law firms become more efficient, like Harsh pointed out. On the second one, sorry, what was the second question?
Second was about when foreign law firms come to India, and that.
Yes, I think absolutely, because foreign law firms have actually been the early adapters, right? I mean, 4-5 years back, some of these law firms had contract generators on their website already. So foreign law firms are the early adopters. Even due diligence, a lot of them had already created tools. So it is only a matter of time that we catch up and also create equally sophisticated tools. And we'll also be, of course, the influence of foreign law firms coming in, and we'll also be learning from them. So yes, it's only a matter of time.
It's only a matter of time. Harsh, I'll take all these questions to you for your inputs.
Before I address your questions, the comparison of generation just brought an anecdote to me that life has evolved from taking a bite from the apple to putting a bite into the apple. Right. I mean, look at the way the world has just changed. In terms of what will 5 years or the future lawyers have, they are definitely going to be equipped with AI for legal research. One thing, lawyers from our generation or seniors to me have toiled their books, libraries, different libraries, judges' libraries, different senior counsel chambers. You know, you try and get a conversation started just so that you can enter the senior counsel's chamber because he has a particular commentary which not other seniors keep for his expertise, and trying to, you know, spend that 10 minutes to just get the correct judgment, that is all going to become very easy. That's going to be handheld. Answering a question that generally comes as much of a scather when you're arguing, when the judge says, do you have any authority to support this? And the lawyer is going to be like, just 1 second. Yes, I do. You know, that is going to really aid lawyers. So AI is going to assist practice exponentially. I hope it makes lawyers more efficient in terms of time, in terms of delivery. But if you are going to look at, you know, a completely AI-run firm, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. I don't think we're going to let that happen either. But concentrating on the India-specific first, we have district courts, we have magistrate courts, we have lawyers who come from not such established backgrounds, but with intellect. Trying to get them to be equipped at a time where still, as of today, internet is not available to all villages, is going to be a difficult task. And we can't discriminate that just because you are a lawyer who does not have access to AI, you know, you shouldn't be getting a brief. So I think it is going to be accepted well, but the traditional form of practice is going to continue a long way.
Okay, point well taken. I'll go to Apar. Cost is not a factor according to an implementation of AI-based modules. We saw ChatGPT is virtually free to use. Do you think cost is a factor or no?
Cost is certainly a factor. It depends on the kind of thing you're doing. If you're training your own model, okay, it takes money. Firstly, you need to have the data, you need to train it, you need to hire people to adjust it in terms of the outputs which are coming, play around with it. The other thing which you need is large amounts of computing power, which is called GPU, and because all of it usually will be done by AWS server, and the server cost will be very, very high. So to make your own model and then to run it, and if depends on the number of users which are there, endpoint users and the cloud computing cost which is there are costs which stack up. So there's a very good report by the AI Now Institute that the tech monopolies which we have right now will perpetuate because the costs to building the model by itself, specialized models. Number one, for instance, if you think about healthcare in terms of early detection, etc., it's not only intellectual property or database rights, etc., which will protect it. It will also be the computing costs by itself. The availability of computing costs, the availability of the GPU, and your ability to run them, because there's market scarcity right now. And the second is your ability to pay them. Primarily for law firms, one thing which is not touched upon is, I think so, there's going to be regulatory activity in several sectors. I think it may be driven through some individual regulators like SEBI, etc., towards looking at large patterns, towards recurring problems they have been facing, like insider trading, etc. They're going to implement these systems, and it's also going to lead to a lot of policy-based billing, which will happen over a period of time, because regulation will eventually, at some point, be prompted. And I think if there's true displacement in the labor market for lawyers by itself, Tarun, then lawyers will petition the Bar Council and say that only natural persons are lawyers, which are entitled to give legal advice, and thereby all these tools need to be prevented from it. I'm not throwing out ideas, I'm just saying profession is rent-seeking, it is a guild, and doctors will do the same thing, poor journalists, okay, but that's not directed to you, but this is the eventual outcome. This is what I see
Point
happening.
well taken. Since, see, we have only 5 minutes and we've had a good Q&A, but I think we should let the audience in to discuss with us. Throwing open to all of you, Vaibhav, I can see.
Because these AI tools are ultimately, at the moment, publicly sourced. So there's a massive issue of breach of client confidentiality and attorney-client privilege as well. And so until and unless you reach to a point which Apar was alluding to, that, you know, law firms come up with their own tools, which will be an expensive affair, where they can develop their own tools, I think corporates in India will also now start forcing lawyers and getting restrictions that you should not be using AI. Because there is a very real risk of breach of, you know, client confidentiality as well as compromising attorney-client privilege. I don't know what other panelists think about it.
Vaibhav, the Samsung case, you must have heard about it, that there was some coding to be done and it was a new invention and the inventor put it on the public chat GPT and it was a messer.
I think that soon a time is going to come where, just as how our websites are right now showing a disclaimer from the Bar Council saying that, you know, we are not soliciting work, there is soon going to be a disclaimer saying that we do not adopt AI norms to give out legal advice. I think that's going to be a future that is going to come up soon. But apart from that, I'm just trying to address this one question that goes about the costs. We do realize that if you are looking at training our own in-house modules for each firm, you will be appointing or you will be bringing on board lawyers for training purposes itself, whilst also having lawyers to give out the legal advice. Because you will have to have specially technology trained lawyers, lawyers with intricate understanding of AI to train the modules. But at the same time, you will also want to have on your sleeve lawyers with expertise in that legal field who are going to explain what is required from these modules. So the costs are going to naturally, you know, rise. It's not really just because today ChatGPT is free, your internal module is going to be, you know, judicial in your expenditure. Today even an HR module for attendance itself for your own firm is raising lakhs of rupees as invoice.
But that's where we come to what Apar said, that you can't use a public platform because Vaibhav says client will not allow it because your breach of data. But preparing your own module is really expensive.
Right.
So maybe the top 2 firms, the top 5 firms can afford it. There is a cost, I think, prohibitive cost. Are there any answers for this, Apar, in your view?
I think just continuing with it, I think what will be most useful is that a lot of law firms also invest in training people, especially abroad. So how to use which tool and which tools are permissible, which tools are not, will be a good starting point, because quite frankly, law schools don't teach you a lot of this stuff. For instance, how to even use a spreadsheet and things like that, which will be a little much more useful and avoid a lot of this heartburn. So that's the approach which can be taken through PQE kind of modules which are done, even for people who have been at firms for some period of time.
Point well taken. See, I have about 1.5 minutes. Anybody from the audience who wants to speak, raise a question, make a point.
This is Varun Bajaj. I run my own law firm, RSD Bajaj Global. Completely new economy driven. And actually, I just wanted to make a comment that we are actually leveraging AI tools as on date to replace the human resource. It's happening as on date. Now, if you go, a lot of your video conferencing, your transcription has started with some tool known as TLWAT TV. It's replacing Zoom. Now what it does is, if you do a Zoom call, it automatically transcripts it and gives you the summary. So at multiple fronts, whether it's communication, there's a huge SaaS play coming, which is software as a service. And what we are doing to the point which was made, so that there's no breach of confidentiality. In fact, we have amended our engagement letter to include permission of any third-party softwares for delivery to the clients, and the clients have agreed to it. So I just wanted to make it a point that it is actually happening as on date. because emerging firms do not want to take the cost on, and they want to do smarter ways to build new firms rather the traditional way. So that movement is happening. Any comments on that? Happy to.
Just a small thing on that. When you transcript on the basis of audio recording, which is done on Zoom or anywhere, but its use is in terms of, let's say, an investigation you're doing, right, into a company which has appointed you to find wrongdoing. You need to also notice where are the pauses. What is the intonation and change in pitch by itself? Those are active ingredients of witness and testimony examination. It's not only transcription. And what I'm trying to highlight is that sometimes there'll be a loss of function in the transcription. For, let's say, a YouTube video, the transcription which is working may not work in a professional engagement between a client and an attorney or a lawyer. So there'll be a cost to the efficiency, and it may not necessarily result in a better product in terms of advice to the client by itself. It may not actually aid that function. And that's important to halt and consider always.
So I think the time is up. We can continue this over coffee after this because, but I would like to thank Apar, Anisha, Harsh and Manisha for joining. Please give a huge round of applause.
Thank you.